So, breaking news, Asha Sharma, CEO of Xbox, all caps, of course, she just did a talk, an interview with Bloomberg as part of a technology conference that they do, where they just sit down with like business leaders and talk about stuff. And she mentioned a few interesting things, but most notably, she did talk about, at least a little, the topic of exclusivity. Now, the exclusive debate and topic is really interesting right now because it is actually regularly the most requested feature or whatever when you poll Xbox fans, which is what they've been doing over the last few months since she's taken over. You do a poll, you ask fans and Xbox fans what they want out of Xbox. They say stuff like lower prices, better hardware, stuff like that. But the number one in all the surveys consistently is exclusives. Problem is, Xbox is a gigantic publisher now. They've spent an ungodly amount of money, and the only way that like a $70 billion acquisition of Activision makes sense is if you are selling it on PlayStation, PC, everywhere. So it just complicates it. Like, no matter how much Xbox could grow, like even if you say it grew 50% annually, which would be insane, but even if we say 50% annual growth, it would take like a quarter century before they would reach the level where Call of Duty probably is profitable. Like breaking even would take a quarter century. They're so expensive to make. They need so much money flowing in to make it make sense that unless Xbox just wants to eat the cost of it, those big tentpole franchises just don't make sense exclusively, like on paper. Yeah, you can say, well, Microsoft could just eat the cost, sure, but that's a lot easier said than done. I mean, there's a reason businesses don't do that, and it's because businesses are like literally designed to make money and not lose it. And if they don't see like a big pot of gold at the end of that, what's the justification? Like losing billions upon billions upon billions of dollars every year to at the end, the reward is you're breaking even? That's kind of a hard sell. It's not like you're gonna be the one company that takes people to the moon and make all the billions or trillions from that. That's not what we're talking about. It's like you can work for a decade and or 2 decades and maybe stop losing money at some point. So the Xbox has been really hesitant to do anything when it comes to exclusivity because it just doesn't really make sense. But Asha talked about it and kind of said the part we've all been wondering and thinking about just out loud. These are a couple of clipped quotes that were taken from the discussion. But when asked about exclusives specifically, she said, quote, "It's a tough topic. In order to be a great publisher, you must have your games reach large audiences. At the same time, we are increasingly becoming a platform. In order to be a platform, you must have exclusive content and services. I think we have to be very thoughtful about each title and how we want to think about it and learn from similar cases in the industry." Now, translation from corpo speak back to human speak. I read that very plainly as there are some games that make sense as exclusives and there are some that do not. Something like Gears of War, Halo, I think those make sense as console exclusives. Starfield, for example, seemingly didn't do gangbuster numbers. Yes, it was a couple or like 2.5 years after the original launch, so kind of skews the data there. But like I think games like that, single player especially games, can work as console exclusives and be totally fine, especially with how Game Pass is monitored. Most of the performance metrics or KPIs that they use for Game Pass are reportedly hours played. The number one metric that Xbox cares about when you launch your game on Game Pass is how many hours it was played. Just like Netflix, just like YouTube, just to give you a little inside baseball, for YouTube, like you know how we can do ABC testing on thumbnails now and titles? You might think that when we test different thumbnails, where we put 3 thumbnails up and then YouTube shows them to a bunch of people and then selects one based on the best performance to be the thumbnail for the video moving forward. When we do that, how YouTube determines a successful thumbnail is not click-through rate, which is what you would think it would be. It's not how many people clicked on it, how fast they clicked on it, or anything like that. The way they gauge it in a successful thumbnail is how much watch time each thumbnail generated, because that shows whether it was worthy. Like you can make a really clickbaity thumbnail, just put a bunch of cleavage or something in your thumbnail and lots of people will click it. That's what used to happen on YouTube back in the early days. Now, I mean, that doesn't do anything because people would click on it, realize that's not the video and click off, so that wouldn't work. YouTube cares about people clicking a video and then actually watching it. Just like with Xbox, they care about people downloading a game, playing it with their subscription, and playing a lot of it so that they don't cancel their subscription, right? So for Xbox and Game Pass specifically, I think having an exclusive like a Starfield, like Gears of War, like Halo is totally fine, and I think that that makes sense. And then you can bring Call of Duty, you can bring any of these other big behemoth franchises or games like Fallout 76 or Elder Scrolls Online or Overwatch 2. You can bring those, or I guess now it's just Overwatch. You can bring those games to those other platforms, and I don't think people really care that much. I mean, it's one of those things I think people have largely accepted is that live service stuff, yeah, put it everywhere, who cares? And I think it's a reflection of what has happened in the industry more broadly, which is that single player gamers have gotten more and more entrenched in their games and in what they do. And then multi-platform gamers are more and more entrenched in where they are. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of crossover. And so if single player gamers want X, that doesn't mean that multi-platform, multiplayer gamers want that same thing. Often they want different things. Often they behave very differently, and that's okay, but you have to understand that those are different audiences. She goes on and says, quote, "My mandate is not 30% accountability margins." That's a reference to the previously suggested margin that Xbox was demanding. There were stories towards the end of Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond's tenure where Microsoft CFO, Amy Wood, I always mix it up if it's Hood or Wood, but Amy, the CFO of Microsoft, reportedly put in a 30% margin, meaning if we take in $1, 30% of that is profit, which is crazy for the video game industry. Most video game companies operate at like 10%, maybe, like it's especially across everything. So that was very steep, and that's why you saw price increases. That's why you saw all sorts of cuts and downsizing and layoffs and stuff, because they had to do that. She said, "My mandate is not 30% accountability margins. It's not enterprise software margins. It's to be the #1 gaming and entertainment company, and that's what we're gonna do. The next 100 days are about resetting the business." And what's really fascinating about that is that mandate, you might breeze past it, but who gives the mandates in a company? The shareholders. But past that, beyond that, usually the CEO. And we have had questions around this since Sarah took over, or rather Asha took over rather. And that was simply the question of what is she here to do? Like, they chose to get rid of Phil, or Phil chose to retire and they saw an opportunity to get rid of Sarah at the same time. Whichever came first, Satya deciding to get rid of Phil or Phil wanting to retire, or if it happened at the same time, it doesn't really matter, because what we know is that they're taking Xbox in a different direction, right? We know that they are doing something very different than what Phil and Sarah wanted to do. And considering that, you kind of have to pause and go, okay, if they're taking it in a different direction, it's kind of one of two options. People thought that they were either sunsetting Xbox and just getting ready to basically shut it down, and Asha was going to come in, be paid a few million, and just told, put it out of its misery. Give it this shot. It'll go to a farm and live with its friends forever. Like, people thought that that's what was going on. And then they started like putting a lot of effort in, which is something you probably don't do if you're planning to just sunset and kill something. So that probably isn't what the mandate was. When Satya hired Asha, called her up and said, "You got the job, this is what I need you to do," it seems like what he told her was not kill the brand. Rather, she's saying that the mandate was to become the #1 entertainment gaming company in the world, which, if we believe her, which you should always be hesitant with any corporate leader, like as with any industry, any company, they're not your friend, okay, just to be clear. Don't get it twisted. But if you go with that and we just say, okay, if that is the mandate, does that line up with what we're seeing? And I personally think it kind of does. Like, we've seen a lot of effort put into rebranding, put into winning back consumer trust, trying to be aggressive and hungry with what they're doing. And I think we've seen behavior that is suggestive of Xbox wanting to do things differently and try to turn the ship around. Whether they can or whether it's too little too late kind of remains to be seen, but it does seem like they are at least trying, which is something they kind of didn't do for the last like 4 years. It seems like they kind of just gave up. So it's very, very interesting. It's very, very interesting where we're at. Transparently and truthfully, I think where we end up, if we fast forward the clocks by a couple of years, I think the big stuff like Call of Duty, Overwatch, that's all going to still be multi-platform. I don't think that's going anywhere, but I don't think the hardcore Xbox fans really care. I think what they care about is stuff like Gears of War, Halo, those like tentpole Xbox experiences, those being exclusive. Eventually stuff like Clockwork Revolution being exclusive. You know, Elder Scrolls 6 I think will be the big tell if they're going to fully commit to this or not. Because what I could see happening, unfortunately, is the same thing that happened with Phil Spencer, where they kind of tried to walk the line and do both. They tried to do some stuff that was big multi-platform and other stuff that was smaller exclusive. And I just don't know if that works, you know, for building a brand and brand value. I just don't think that does the job. And I think we've seen that also with PlayStation's approach, where they're giving up seemingly on cross-platform delivery. So I think they will need to fully commit. And that's kind of where we're at in the industry in general, is that you got to commit at this point. Like with all of these different ideas and concepts, and they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be the big, massive publisher that puts games everywhere and sells everything and millions of copies on PlayStation and Xbox and PC. It just doesn't really work that way. If you are a platform holder, people have different demands and expectations for a platform than a big publisher. And you can't have it both ways. If Xbox wants to lean fully in and just do the publisher thing, okay, just don't be surprised when nobody buys your console, you know, because why would they? Same with like if Ubisoft launched a console but still is putting all of their games on every platform, you'd be like, yeah, why would I buy the Ubi box? Why would I do that? There's no reason. If Assassin's Creed games are exclusive to the Ubi box, now we're talking. Maybe I'll consider it if I'm a diehard Assassin's Creed fan. But, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it too in this regard. Like, if you're a platform and you want exclusive premium content and people to rush out and spend hundreds or potentially over $1,000 on your hardware and commit into the ecosystem, giving you 30% of every digital copy sold, you got to give them stuff they can't get elsewhere. Because if they can get that stuff elsewhere, they probably will, especially if that other platform has stuff they can't get on yours, you know? I don't like exclusives. I don't like platform exclusives. I think all that stuff is lame. But if PlayStation starts really playing that game heavily again, like it's kind of like you got to play that game or not at all, because this half-assed approach is just not going to do it. So it's going to be fascinating, but I think it's interesting that Asha is starting to talk about it, and she's saying specifically that in the next 100 days, they have to make a move. Like, this is where things happen. So I would guess by the end of the summer, especially going into the fall with GTA 6, we're going to have a very clear idea of what they are doing. And I think it's the prime time, because we just got a report saying that PlayStation sales for consoles plummeted 50%, that people have basically stopped buying hardware. And that is kind of a great reset moment for the industry in terms of hardware purchasing decisions, where people can maybe reset and pivot to another platform if there's a solid offering, which Xbox has the chance to provide if they don't screw it up. So interesting times we live in, my friends. But I've got lots more content. Make sure to subscribe, because we've got a lot going on this weekend with Summer Games Fest. I'm going to be here reporting on all of it. The whole Luke Stevens crew is here rocking and rolling, and we cannot wait to show you what we've been cooking up. Until then, my friends, much love. I'll see you soon. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye.
He took my thing.